The rain hammered against the windshield like bullets from heaven, relentless, unforgiving. Matthew Rogers gripped the steering wheel tighter, his calloused hands telling the story of 15 years, fixing engines and broken dreams. At 34, he had learned that life rarely offered second chances. But tonight would prove him wrong. "Daddy, why are we driving so late?" 8-year-old Zara's voice cut through the storm from the back seat, her small frame barely visible in the rearview mirror. "Grandma needed her medicine, baby girl," Matthew replied, his deep voice carrying the weight of responsibility that single fathers know all too well. "Sometimes we gotta do what we gotta do, even when it's hard." The old pickup truck's headlights carved through the darkness of Riverside Avenue, when suddenly Matthew saw her, a figure in white, crumpled against the sidewalk like a broken angel. His heart stopped. Without thinking, he slammed the brakes. "Stay in the truck, Zara." His voice carried urgency as he jumped out into the freezing rain. The woman was unconscious, breathing, but barely. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, mixing with the rainwater that pooled around her expensive designer dress. Even in the darkness, Matthew could see she didn't belong in this neighborhood. Her skin was pale as porcelain, her jewelry worth more than his truck. But in that moment, none of that mattered. She was human, she was hurt, and Matthew Rogers had never walked away from someone in need. "Mom, can you hear me?" He knelt beside her, rain soaking through his work shirt. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight into his soul. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Help, me." Those two words would change everything. Time became a blur of sirens and fluorescent lights. Matthew carried the mysterious woman to his truck. Her body limp in his strong arms, Zara watched with wide eyes as her father transformed into a man on a mission, determined, focused, unbreakable. "Daddy, is she gonna die?" Zara's innocent question cut through Matthew's concentration as he raced towards St. Mary's Hospital. "Not if I can help it." "Sweetheart," he replied, glancing at the unconscious woman in his passenger seat. "Not if I can help it." The emergency room erupted into controlled chaos when Matthew burst through the doors, carrying the woman like she weighed nothing. Nurses surrounded them instantly, their trained eyes assessing the situation. "What happened?" Dr. Martinez, a tired-looking woman in scrubs, took charge immediately. "Found her on Riverside Avenue," Matthew explained quickly. "She was unconscious, bleeding from her head. I don't know what happened." As the medical team wheeled her away, Matthew felt an unexpected emptiness, as if something important was being taken from him. He watched until the white doors swallowed her completely. "Sir," a young nurse approached him, "we'll need some information for our records." "I don't know her name," Matthew admitted, suddenly aware of how his oil-stained clothes looked in the pristine hospital. I couldn't leave her there." The nurse smiled warmly. "You did the right thing. She's lucky you found her." Lucky? Matthew wondered if luck had anything to do with it, or if this was something bigger, something that would change his life forever. 3 hours later, Dr. Martinez emerged with news. "She's stable, concussion and some cuts, but she'll recover fully. You saved her life tonight." Matthew felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Can I see her?" "She's sleeping, but yes." "Room 312. Standing in the doorway of room 312, Matthew watched the woman sleep in the soft hospital lighting. She looked peaceful, beautiful. Her blonde hair spread across the pillow like spun gold, and even with the bandage on her forehead, there was something regal about her. "Thank you," she whispered suddenly, her blue eyes opening to meet his. "You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," Matthew replied softly. She smiled weakly. "No, not everyone. You're special." Those words followed Matthew home that night, echoing in his mind as he tucked Zara into bed and tried to return to normal life. But nothing felt normal anymore. 7 days passed like a slow-motion dream. Matthew threw himself into work at his garage, Rogers Auto Repair, trying to forget the woman with blue eyes. But every time he heard rain against the window, every time he saw a white car, he thought of her. "You've been distracted all week, Matt," his friend Carlos observed, leaning against a Honda Civic with a blown gasket. "What's eating at you?" "Nothing," Matthew lied, his hands working automatically on an engine he could fix with his eyes closed. "Just tired." But Carlos knew him too well. "This about that woman you took to the hospital." Before Matthew could answer, the bell above his garage door chimed, and his world stopped. She stood in the doorway like a vision. No longer the broken woman from the rain, she was radiant, powerful, magnificent. Designer clothes that probably cost more than Matthew made in 3 months. Perfect makeup, and those same piercing blue eyes that had haunted his dreams. "Hello, Matthew," she said, her voice smooth as silk. You remember my name?" He wiped his hands on a rag, suddenly conscious of his appearance. "I remember everything about that night," she replied, stepping into his world of motor oil and honest work. "I'm Grace Taylor." Grace. The name fit her perfectly. "How did you find me?" Matthew asked. His heart racing. "I have my ways," she smiled mysteriously. "I wanted to thank you properly and make you an offer you can't refuse." Carlos whistled low and made himself scarce, sensing the electricity in the air. "I don't need thanks," Matthew said simply. "I'm just glad you're okay." "But I need to give them," Grace replied, her eyes never leaving his. "Do you know who I am, Matthew Rogers?" He shook his head. "I'm worth $300 million, she said matter-of-factly. "And you didn't even ask my name that night. You just saved me because it was the right thing to do." Matthew felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "Money doesn't matter when someone's hurt." Grace stepped closer, and Matthew caught a hint of expensive perfume mixed with something else, something like desperation. "That's exactly why I'm here," she whispered. "I want to invest in you, Matthew. In this place, in your dreams." "I don't have any dreams that big," Matthew replied honestly. "Then let me give you some." The next morning, Grace returned with blueprints, contracts, and a smile that could melt steel. Matthew stared at the papers spread across his workbench, numbers that made his head spin. $2 million, Grace explained, her manicured finger tracing the renovation plans. "We expand this garage into a full-service automotive center, 20 bays, state-of-the-art equipment, a dozen employees." Matthew's hands shook as he held the architectural drawings. His little garage transformed into something magnificent. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why me?" Grace was quiet for a long moment, her blue eyes distant. "Because you're the first person in 10 years who helped me without wanting something in return." "But you want something now," Matthew observed. He wasn't educated, but he wasn't stupid. Grace's composure cracked slightly. "I need a partner, someone I can trust, someone whose name can be on the business license." Red flags went up in Matthew's mind. "What aren't you telling me, Grace?" She looked away, and in that moment Matthew saw past the designer clothes and perfect makeup. He saw a woman who was scared, desperate, running from something. "There are some complications in my business dealings," she admitted. "Nothing illegal, but I need time to sort things out. Having the garage in your name would help." Matthew set down the papers. "Grace, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but please," she interrupted, and the vulnerability in her voice made Matthew's chest tight. "I know it sounds crazy, I know we just met, but I've never met someone like you." Their eyes locked, and Matthew felt something electric pass between them, something dangerous and wonderful. "I need to think about this," he said finally. "Of course." Grace collected her papers, but paused at the door. "Matthew, that night when you found me, I wasn't just hurt, I was giving up, ready to let the rain wash me away. You didn't just save my life, you gave me a reason to fight." After she left, Matthew stood in his garage for a long time, staring at the spot where she'd been. Zara found him there when she got home from school. "Daddy, who was that pretty lady?" Matthew looked down at his daughter's curious face. "Someone who might change our lives, baby girl. Is that good or bad?" Matthew wished he knew the answer. 2 weeks later, Rogers Auto Repair was unrecognizable. Construction crews worked around the clock, transforming Matthew's humble garage into something that belonged in a magazine. Grace visited daily, always dressed perfectly, always bringing coffee and pastries from expensive cafes. "You don't have to do all this," Matthew told her one afternoon, watching her direct contractors like a general commanding troops. "I want to," she replied simply. "This is the first time in years I've built something instead of just managing money." Matthew noticed how she never talked about her family, never mentioned friends, never explained where her fortune came from, but he was beginning not to care. Grace Taylor was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, illuminating corners of his life he'd forgotten existed. "Daddy likes her," Zara announced one evening over dinner. Matthew nearly choked on his spaghetti. "What makes you say that?" "You smile different when she's around," Zara replied with 8-year-old wisdom. "Like how you smile when I get A's on my report card." Out of the mouths of babes the next day, Grace arrived with news that made Matthew's blood run cold. "There's a problem," she said without preamble. Her usual composure cracked. "Some people are asking questions about the garage, about you." "What kind of people?" "The kind you don't want asking questions," Grace replied, pacing his small office like a caged lion. Matthew, there's something I haven't told you. I figured that much. Grace stopped pacing and looked directly at him. The money I'm investing, some people think it belongs to them. Matthew felt the world tilt. Grace, what did you do? Nothing illegal, she said quickly, but morally complicated. My ex-business partner thinks I cheated him out of a deal. He's not the type to let things go. How not the type? Grace showed him a photo on her phone, a black SUV parked across the street from the garage. They've been watching for 3 days, she whispered. Matthew felt ice in his veins. Grace, I have a daughter. I know I'm so sorry, I never meant for this to happen. But even as fear gripped him, Matthew found himself stepping closer to Grace instead of away. We'll figure it out. We. Her voice was small, hopeful. Yeah, Matthew said, surprising himself. We. The black SUV was gone the next morning, but Matthew felt eyes on him everywhere. He dropped Zara at school with extra hugs and picked her up personally instead of letting her walk home. Grace noticed his tension immediately. I should leave, she said quietly, standing in the middle of the construction chaos. This is my mess, not yours, and too late for that, Matthew replied, not looking up from the engine he was working on. Besides, where would you go? I don't know, I've been running for so long I forgot what it feels like to want to stay somewhere. Her honesty hit Matthew like a physical blow. He set down his wrench and really looked at her. This mysterious woman who had crashed into his life like a beautiful disaster. Tell me the truth, Grace, all of it. Grace closed her eyes, and when she opened them, Matthew saw years of pain swimming in those blue depths. I built a tech company with my ex-partner, Derek Nathaniel, she began. We developed software that tracks financial transactions for major banks. It was worth hundreds of millions. That's good, right? It was, until I discovered Derek was using our software to help clients hide money from the IRS. When I tried to blow the whistle, he destroyed all the evidence and made it look like I was the one committing fraud. Matthew felt pieces clicking together. So you took the money and ran. I took what was rightfully mine, Grace corrected. But Derek has connections. Dangerous ones. People who don't care about courts or evidence. And now they think I'm helping you. Grace nodded miserably. I'm so sorry, Matthew. You deserve better than this. Matthew surprised them both by laughing. Grace, you think this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, isn't it? Try being a single black father trying to build a business in this neighborhood, Matthew replied. I've been fighting uphill battles my whole life. At least now I've got someone worth fighting for. The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Matthew, Grace whispered. Before either could say more, Carlos burst through the garage door. Matt! You need to see this. Outside, spray-painted across Matthew's truck in red letters, was a message. Give her back. Grace went pale. They know about Zara. Matthew felt something primal and protective surge through him. No one threatens my daughter. We should call the police, Grace suggested. And tell them what? That my business partner's ex-business partner might be mad at us. Matthew shook his head. This isn't a job for police. Then what? Matthew looked at Grace. Really looked at her. Behind the fear and sophistication, he saw strength. Behind the designer clothes, he saw a fighter. We handle it ourselves. That night, Matthew sent Zara to stay with his sister across town. Grace tried to leave again, but Matthew wasn't having it. We're past that now, he said firmly. They made this about my daughter, now it's personal. Grace had never seen this side of Matthew, the protective father, the man who wouldn't back down. It was terrifying and attractive in equal measure. What's the plan? She asked. We meet with Derek, face to face, end this. Matthew, you don't understand. Derek isn't just a businessman. He has connections to people who make problems disappear. Then we better make sure we're not a problem. Grace arranged the meeting for the next evening at a high-end restaurant downtown. Neutral ground public place, safe as they could make it. Matthew put on his only suit, the one he'd worn to job interviews and Zara's school presentations, next to Grace in her designer dress. He felt out of place but not outclassed. There was something about Matthew Rogers that money couldn't buy. Integrity, strength, the kind of man who would run into a storm to save a stranger. Derek Nathaniel looked exactly like Grace had described. Expensive suit, cold eyes, the kind of smile that never reached his face. He was flanked by two men who were obviously not business associates. Grace, Derek said smoothly. So you look well. Prison food must agree with you. Oh wait, you haven't been caught yet. Derek, Grace replied evenly, her hand finding Matthew's under the table. I see you brought friends. Insurance, Derek shrugged. Now shall we discuss the return of my money? It's not your money, Grace replied. The courts will never see you, Derek interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper. Neither will your new boyfriend here. Matthew felt rage building in his chest, but Grace's hand squeezed his, keeping him calm. What do you want, Derek? All of it, every penny, transfer it back? And I forget this ever happened. And if I don't, Derek's smile was arctic. Ask your boyfriend about the brake lines on his truck. The blood drained from Matthew's face. You son of... Easy, big guy, one of Derek's men said, his jacket opening just enough to reveal a gun. Grace stood up slowly. I need time to think. You have 24 hours, Derek said. After that, well, accidents happen, especially to single fathers. Back at the garage, Matthew paced like a caged animal, while Grace sat in his office chair, staring at her laptop screen. $300 million, she said quietly. That's what Derek wants. Do you have it? Most of it, but Matthew, if I give it back, he wins. All the people he's hurt, all the money he's helped criminals hide, it all gets buried. Matthew stopped pacing. And if you don't, he kills us both. The words hung heavy in the air. Matthew thought about Zara. Safe at his sister's house, probably doing homework and watching cartoons. She didn't deserve to lose the only parent she had left. But he looked at Grace, really looked at her, and saw something that made his decision easy. What do you want to do? He asked. Grace's head snapped up. What do I want? Yeah. Forget Derek, forget the money, forget everything else. What does Grace Taylor want? For the first time since he'd known her, Grace looked truly vulnerable. I want to stop running, she whispered. I want to build something good, with someone who sees me for who I really am. Not what I'm worth, I want. What? I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Matthew crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Grace to her feet. Then that's what we'll do. Matthew, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, he said, his hands framing her face. I understand that I'm falling in love with a woman who's brave enough to fight corruption, even when it means losing everything. I understand that I'd rather have one day with you than a lifetime of safe, boring days without you. This is crazy, Grace breathed. Yeah, it is, Matthew smiled. But so is jumping out of a truck in a rainstorm to save a stranger. Sometimes crazy is exactly what you need. When they kissed, it was like lightning and thunder, and the first warm day of spring all rolled into one perfect moment. Grace felt pieces of herself she'd thought were lost forever clicking back into place. So what's the plan? She asked when they broke apart. Matthew's grin was pure mischief. We're going to give Derek exactly what he deserves. The plan was dangerous, crazy, and probably illegal, which made it perfect. Grace had kept detailed records of Derek's criminal activities, enough to put him away for decades. The problem was getting the evidence to the FBI without Derek killing them first. We need a distraction, Matthew explained, spreading papers across his workbench. Something big enough to keep Derek's attention while we deliver the evidence. What kind of distraction? Matthew's smile was wicked. The kind that involves a mechanic, 3 construction crews, and a very public grand opening. Grace stared at him. You want to use the garage opening as cover? Derek expects us to hide. Instead, we invite half the city to watch us take him down. It was brilliant and terrifying. They spent the next 12 hours preparing. Grace organized her evidence files while Matthew called in every favor he'd ever earned. By morning, Rogers Auto Repair was buzzing with activity. Reporters, city officials, potential customers, and at least 3 undercover FBI agents Grace had contacted. Derek arrived at exactly noon, his black SUV looking ominous among the balloons and streamers. Interesting strategy, he said, approaching Matthew and Grace near the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Very public, very stupid. Sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight, Matthew replied calmly. You have something for me. Grace held up a USB drive. Everything you want. Derek's eyes glittered with satisfaction. Transfer complete. See for yourself. Derek plugged the drive into his phone, and his expression changed from triumph to confusion to rage. This isn't money, he snarled. This is evidence, Grace finished. Copies of every illegal transaction you've ever made, every dirty deal, every bribe. All of it. Derek's hand moved toward his jacket, but Matthew was ready in one fluid motion. He spun Derek around and pinned his arm behind his back. FBI, the undercover agents revealed themselves, surrounding Derek's men. Nobody move, the crowd gasped, as Derek Nathaniel, millionaire businessman, was handcuffed in front of 50 witnesses and 3 news cameras. You think this is over? Derek spat as they led him away. I have lawyers. Had lawyers, Grace corrected. They're being arrested too. As the FBI cars drove away, Matthew and Grace stood together in the aftermath of their victory. Around them, the grand opening continued. People touring the new garage, children eating cake, reporters interviewing customers. "Is it really over?" Matthew asked. "The legal stuff will take months," Grace replied. "But Derek can't hurt us anymore. And the money? It's all going to victims of financial fraud. Every penny." Matthew stared at her. "You're giving it all away." "I never wanted his dirty money anyway," Grace smiled. "Besides, I've got everything I need right here." 3 months later, Rogers Auto Repair was the most successful garage in the city. Matthew had hired 8 employees, expanded into luxury car service, and was considering opening a second location. But the best part of his success was sharing it with Grace. She had moved into a small apartment above the garage, close enough to be part of Matthew's daily life, far enough to maintain some independence. Zara adored her, especially when Grace helped with math homework and taught her about business. "She's going to ask you to marry her," Zara announced one evening, while Grace helped her with a science project. Grace nearly dropped the volcano they were building. "What makes you say that?" "He bought a ring," Zara replied matter-of-factly. "It's hidden in his toolbox under the wrench set. I saw it when I was looking for batteries." Grace's heart stopped. "A ring? A pretty one, diamond and everything." Zara looked up from her baking soda mixture. "You're gonna say yes, right?" I don't know if he's actually going to ask." "He is," Zara said with 8-year-old certainty. "Daddy's been practicing in the mirror." That evening, Matthew seemed nervous, dropping tools, forgetting customer names, checking his watch every 5 minutes. "You okay?" Grace asked as they closed up shop. "Fine," Matthew replied too quickly. "Just tired." But at dinner, he kept staring at her with an expression Grace couldn't read. Finally, Zara excused herself to do homework, leaving them alone. "Grace," Matthew began, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "Yes, I know we haven't been together very long. I know your life was complicated, and mine was simple, and we're still figuring out how all the pieces fit together." Grace's pulse quickened. "Matthew, but I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you." Matthew stood up, his hands trembling slightly. "I know that you make me want to be better than I am. I know that Zara lights up when you walk into a room, and I know that I don't want to spend another day wondering what it would be like to call you family." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Grace Taylor, will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, simple, elegant, exactly what Grace would have chosen if she'd been choosing for herself. But more than the ring, more than the proposal, what took Grace's breath away was the look in Matthew's eyes. Love, hope, fear, and complete vulnerability. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." When Matthew slipped the ring onto her finger, Grace felt the last broken piece of her heart snap back into place. The engagement celebration was small, but perfect. Just Matthew, Grace, Zara, and a few close friends at the garage. But as they were cleaning up, Grace received a phone call that changed everything. "Grace Taylor," the voice was professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, this is attorney Patricia Webb. I represent the estate of Eleanor Matthews. I believe you knew her as your grandmother." Grace nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry, you must have the wrong number. My grandmother died when I was 10. Miss Taylor, I think you should sit down." 20 minutes later, Grace sat in Matthew's office, staring at documents that rewrote her entire history. "Eleanor Matthews was your father's mother," Attorney Webb explained over speakerphone. "She didn't die when you were 10. She was forced to give up contact with you when your parents divorced." "That's impossible," Grace whispered. "My father said she was dead." "She's been looking for you for 25 years, Webb continued gently. "She passed away last month and left you everything, including a letter explaining why she couldn't contact you sooner." Matthew squeezed Grace's hand as Webb read Eleanor's letter. "My dearest Grace, if you're hearing this, it means I finally found a way to reach you. Your father forbade me from seeing you after the divorce, said I was a bad influence. He was probably right. I was poor, uneducated, worked 3 jobs just to keep food on my table. But I loved you, sweetheart. I loved you every single day, and I never stopped looking for you." Grace was crying now, and Matthew pulled her closer. "I know you became successful, built a life I could never have given you, but I also know you must have felt alone sometimes. I want you to know you were never alone. You were always loved, and I want you to have the one thing I managed to save for you, the house where your grandfather was born. It's not much, but it's yours. It's your history, your roots. I hope someday you can call it home." Attorney Webb's voice was gentle. "The house is here in Millbrook. About an hour north of where you are now. It's a small place, needs work, but it's been in your family for 4 generations. After the call ended, Grace sat in stunned silence. You okay? Matthew asked softly. I thought I was alone in the world, Grace whispered. No family, no roots, no place I really belonged, and all this time, she was looking for you. What kind of person was I, Matthew? I had all this money, all these resources, and I never tried to find her. Matthew turned Grace's face toward his. You were a person who was lied to by someone you trusted. You were a kid who believed what your father told you. That's not your fault. I want to see the house, Grace said suddenly. Then we'll go see it. Eleanor Matthews' house was everything Grace had never known she wanted. Small, weathered, surrounded by oak trees that had stood for decades. The porch swing creaked in the breeze, and wildflowers grew in chaotic abundance around the foundation. It's perfect, Grace breathed, standing in the doorway with Matthew and Zara. Inside, the house told stories, family photos on the mantel, a quilt draped over the sofa, books filled with handwritten notes in the margins in the bedroom. They found boxes of letters, all addressed to Grace, all returned unopened. Happy 16th birthday, my darling girl. I wonder if you learned to drive yet. I saw your picture in the business magazine today. You look so much like your mother. I pray every night that you're happy, that you're loved, that you know how proud I am. 25 years of love preserved in a cardboard box. She never gave up, Grace whispered, clutching a letter to her chest. Neither did you, Matthew replied. You just didn't know what you were looking for. That evening, they sat on the porch swing as Zara chased fireflies in the yard. Grace leaned against Matthew's shoulder, feeling more at peace than she had in years. I want to fix this place up, she said quietly. Make it a home again. Our home. Grace looked up at him. Is that okay? I know it's not fancy like... Grace, Matthew interrupted. I don't care if we live in a mansion or a cardboard box. Home isn't a place. It's wherever you and Zara are. I love you, Matthew Rogers. I love you too, Grace Matthews, soon to be Rogers. 6 months later, they were married in the backyard of Eleanor's house, surrounded by friends, family, and the ghosts of love that had waited patiently to be reunited. Grace wore her grandmother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in tissue paper and memories, as Matthew kissed his bride under the oak tree where 4 generations of Matthew's women had pledged their love. Grace felt the last piece of her puzzle click into place. She had money, success, a thriving business, but more than that, she had something money couldn't buy. She had a family, she had roots, she had a man who had seen her at her lowest point and chosen to love her anyway. Thank you, she whispered against Matthew's lips. For what? For stopping in the rain, for taking a chance on a stranger, for showing me that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as disasters. Matthew smiled, the same smile that had convinced Grace to trust him with her secrets, her heart, and her future. Thank you for being worth saving. As they danced under the stars with Zara giggling and spinning between them, Grace realized that her grandmother had been right about one thing. She had never been alone. Love had been waiting for her all along, patient as rain, strong as oak trees, and beautiful as a mechanic with oil-stained hands and a heart big enough to save the world. Sometimes the best love stories begin with the worst storms.